Hi, this is Alex. You might know my mom, Heather, from Shine.fm. This is the Shine.fm Momcast. Take it away.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Momcast today. I'm Heather, and I have someone who you probably don't necessarily know his name, but you know of his band, Sanctus Real. The former lead singer of Sanctus Real, Matt Hammitt, you joined me today. Thank you so much for being here. You wrote a book called Lead Me, and we're going to talk about some of your story today.
Yep, gotcha. Yep, hey, I'm Matt Hammitt, and it's good to be here on the Momcast. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So you are the former lead singer of Sanctus Real. Tell us how Sanctus Real started, because I don't know that many people know the beginnings of it.
Basically, Sanctus Real was a band that I started, with my friends in high school in 1996, and we would have definitely named the band something easier to pronounce without hearing it if we would have known it was going to last for all these years, and so basically our drummer came to us and just said, hey, I found this word sanctus in the dictionary, because we knew sanctified, sanctuary. We were a bunch of Protestant kids. We've never heard, the Latin term sanctus, which everybody in the Catholic Church totally knows.
Okay.
And so yeah, but it was just funny. But it really, the heart of the name was hymn of praise, holy, set apart, all the things we really wanted to be as a band, and Real just being like, hey, we want to be real, and authentic. And so that was really the heart and the start of the band. And gosh, we ended up signing a record deal at the age of 20 when I was 21. So we spent a couple of years just out of high school kind of courting with different record labels, and it was so crazy just that time of so many different labels reaching out to just a bunch of young guys who had no clue this thing was going to work out. So we signed with Sara Records in 2001 and made our first album and went on the road full time. I had no idea that would go 8 albums, and for me would last 20 years, and still the guys have continued on, but it was quite the journey for us, for sure, and I'm really grateful for it.
So when did you meet Sara? Tell us a little bit. You are married, you have 4 kids, and I want to kind of track a little bit of your story there. You tell in the book, it's called Lead Me, about meeting Sara, which I think is really a cool story. We don't necessarily have to share all of that, but tell us how you met Sara, and then how long before you guys married, and kind of where that timeline is to what you were doing in music at the time.
So at the same time, I signed a record deal, right around that same time frame. I got married.
Wow.
To Sara, who I had met, only about a year and a half before, and it was pretty much like it was one of those love at first sight kind of stories for us. So we're just madly in love, and the world is all good, and then we hop in a van as a married couple right after our honeymoon with 4 other guys. With no money, totally broke. And there were 2 sides of this. One side was I got to see the world with, my love of my life, we get to see the world together and travel. And in one way it was so romantic. But, after months of that, and years, so for 4 years she traveled us that way.
Wow.
And we were broke pretty much the whole time. And you can imagine being literally living in a van. Basically, we don't have enough money for hotels half the time, and just grinding to make it. And man, that lack of time for us to be intimate and have conversation and then even fight, we couldn't even fight, and that was really, really difficult for us, in setting the pattern for especially conflict in our early years of marriage, which really kind of set that stage for, some of these tensions that I felt throughout my entire career. This balance of how do I be a great husband? And then we have kids. How do I be a great father? And then how do I do great at my job? And how do those 2 things work together? And I think this is a tension that everybody feels.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So when did she decide to come off the road? Was it when she was pregnant? Or was that like, when did that decision happen? And then how did that change the dynamic? And you talk about that in the book, but I want you to talk a little bit about that with us now too.
Yeah, absolutely. When we became pregnant after 4 years of marriage with our first daughter, Emmy, and it was in Sarah's, kind of toward the end of Sarah's second trimester, she was like sleeping in the back of a van, going on the road, going like, okay, both of us were like, this isn't good anymore. You got to go home. And so at that time, she ended up leaving the road, and she went back and just we had our first baby a few months later, and so that was the beginning for us of a different season. Mm-hmm. Okay, now it's not like being together under these hard circumstances. Well, now we're apart.
Right.
And touring didn't really slow down for us. Mm-hmm. And so now we're navigating a whole new set of issues, which is the distance.
So let's talk about, like, when you came home, you had one idea of what home was going to look like for you. And Sarah had a totally different idea of what home was going to look like. And I think this is not, I don't think this issue is particularly just about you being gone and her being home. I even think there's times with people who work long hours, or like I think in your marriage, you all have these expectations of what the other person should be doing. Talk to me about how you kind of navigated through that, what your feelings were and what Sarah felt, and how that finally at some point came to a head.
I'll set this up with a little bit of expectation and reality from both sides.
Right.
So my expectation was, okay, well, I'm out here, working day and night. We're driving through the night, setting up all our own gear and driving long hours, and then working long hours and performing and meeting, new music bands and making these friends and all this stuff. So I'm out providing, we're building this dream. And now I'm thinking I'm going to go home, and Sarah's, I've provided enough now for Sarah to stay home with our kids. And I'm going to come home, and like, it's going to be a restful, peaceful place. She's going to have taken care of the house. And I'm thinking it's going to be, clean, and dinner's going to be, ready. And it's just dumb, right? It's like the stuff you see on TV.
Right.
Like, when you're growing up, or maybe the way your mom did it or whatever. So but the reality is I walk through the door, and it's like the diapers hit my chest, I'm like, you're up. I'm walking over piles of dirty laundry, and Sarah's at her wit's end, and she's been stretched thin, basically feeling like a single mom. And so it's just like I walk from one chaotic situation to the place where I think I'm going to find rest, but it's just as chaotic, and in ways even more, because now I have to face the reality of what she's been dealing with as well.
Right.
And she's thinking, okay, like, oh, my knight in shining armor is going to walk through the door, and he's going to say, how can I serve you? And how can I take all the weight off your shoulders?
Right.
And I'm going to come in and just bring the stability, and here comes this guy walking in like, oh man, I'm so tired with all these dumb expectations. And she's ticked because she's like, dude, you know what? Like, you've been out on the road, and I've been here holding down the fort. Like, I need you. Right. Now you got to step up.
Right.
When I'm thinking I'm just going to relax a little bit. So so there's definitely some sparks in the wrong way, some fireworks going on.
Yeah.
Between us, setting some fires, there. It was hard times to get adjusted to all that.
Now you guys have 4 kids. You have 2 girls and 2 boys, and you definitely were thrown quite a curveball when it came to Bowen. Why don't you tell a little bit of Bowen's story, and then how that really affected your guys' family and your marriage? How did you, because I've heard, and I've never been through a medical trauma with a child, but I've heard that in itself can cause families to break up because of the stress of that. And you guys definitely were in a huge high stress situation with Bowen. So share that story with us.
Leading up to So there's two things happening here at the same time. Number one, I wrote that song "Lead Me," that many people who listen to Christian radio have heard.
Right.
And it was about being a more present husband and father. And so this has happened just before this season with Bowen, which I'll get to. But I had written this song about being present and trying to be a good dad and wanting, to kind of step more into that role. And God, I felt, was really using that song at that time. And not that song, actually, but my heart. That was my heart with that song. And I felt like a lot of things were healing between me and Sara. And I felt like, okay, I've got this thing. Like, I'm moving from being a man of good intentions to a man of action in the ways that my family needs me. And I felt like it was all coming together. And then Pieces of a Real Heart, the album with Lead Me, comes out to the world in March of 2010. And it's crazy because it's got this patchwork heart on the cover, Pieces of a Real Heart.
Yeah.
1 month later, Sara and I find out that our third baby was going to be born with only half of his heart. And so, two things. First of all, that name of that album and the patchwork heart on the cover and all these lyrics about heart in this album all transformed in terms of their meaning to us and began to speak to us in a totally different way, as if God had been preparing us for this.
Yeah.
Secondly, I've been feeling like we were like getting to the top of the mountain, and now I'm just seeing a whole new mountain to climb. And it is true that somewhere between I've heard different statistics, but often I've heard over 80% of marriages who suffer chronically ill children end in divorce. And so a whole new grief and kind of a whole new strain of how do we not only make this tension between work and family, or how do we ease that tension, but now we've got a brand new tension right in the middle of all of it.
Right.
And so the craziest part about this is the day that the song Lead Me went #1 on the radio nationwide was the day that Sara and I were at Bowen's bedside 5 days after he was born, basically watching him go through his very first open heart surgery. You want to talk about a real picture of the literal tension that was happening inside of us, even metaphorically, or even internally. You can see that external tension. #1 song, career is right where we've always wanted it to be. We've never had a #1 in that format before, which was the main adult contemporary format, basically similar to Top 40 as, in Christian music. And we were like, wow, that's always what we wanted. And here I am at my son's bedside, not knowing if he's even going to live. And it's like, man, those two worlds could not be further apart. For the next almost 6 months, we endured 2 open heart surgeries, and Bowen had a stroke and cardiac arrest. We almost lost them. And like at the same time, the band was like nominated for a Grammy, and like I didn't get to go because I was in the hospital. And like, man, just this tension was so evident. And and that's really the struggle that continued to kind of brew up inside of me, leading me to a place where I had to make some really hard decisions about what my priorities were.
Yeah, because I started reading the book. I got it a couple days ago, and I told you before we started that you start out the book that's called Lead Me with how you prepared yourself to talk to your lifelong friends about how you weren't going to do this anymore. And I'm like getting choked up for you because like, and I'm not even a person who ever wanted a music career, ever wanted anything like that. But like, this is something that people dream of, Matt. Like this is things that people, and you had it and you said, you know what? I got to tell my people that I can't do this anymore. So walk us through that, because I can't even imagine what that was like to come to that decision and then have that conversation.
I felt a little bit, I liken it to maybe what Peter felt like when he actually stepped out of the boat to like walk to Jesus.
Yeah.
I felt like the Lord was calling me to serve my family and to step away and take that journey of leading my family first. And but I really wanted to keep one foot in the boat where it was safe. And so I was really terrified, and there were 2 reasons I was terrified. Obviously, you think about Peter, if you're gonna walk on the water, like you put your first foot in. I just can't imagine actually taking the weight of my body off of my stable foot and placing my full weight into the water, and that's what it felt like leaving Sanctus Real in a spiritual kind of emotional way for me. Like I'm taking my second foot out of this place that had been my refuge or my stability, even my identity at times, for so long.
Yeah.
And it was two things: the fear of what am I going to do to provide for my family, even though I know I'm moving to provide for them in new ways they really need. But financially, what am I going to do, and career-wise, and what's my new identity, and how does this work? And my other fear was, what about the guys? Like, I'm the face of the band. I'm the primary songwriter. Am I just leaving my best friends high and dry? And of course, it was like I was making all the plans I could to stay for another year and make sure that all the business was settled and the guys could move forward with a clean slate, business-wise, and all this. Like I was doing that, but it was more than that. I was just so worried. What are these guys going to do? What are these guys going to do without me? And at some point, I realized, like, actually, God kind of spoke to my heart, and what I felt I heard kind of whispered to me was, do you think you're the only child that I love?
Wow.
And I realized, like, oh my gosh, God just got this. Like, he loves all of us. This isn't just for me. This is for everybody.
Right.
This is for all of us. God knows. And so I think that brought me to peace to be able to finally sit down with the guys and say those words that I've been needing to say, which is, hey, I'm being called away and I need to go home. And it was hard, and they were upset at first, and of course they would be, and not because they were mad at me so much, they were just hurting, and we were best friends, and this is what we built together for 20 years. And,
right.
It was excruciating for sure. It was hard. I said I know a little bit of what Mike Donahhue's going through right now.
Yeah, right.
North,
yes, exactly. Yeah,
so hard.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So tell me about that transition off the road. Like, what was that like? What did you start to see as you were more present, were more available to your family? How did things change?
It was a time for really Sara and I to reflect and begin a new cycle of communication. It was learning how to breathe and give margin in our life for us to experience things and feel things as a family and as a married couple that we hadn't given ourselves space for. And so some of that meant, painful conversations of, hey, how did these years, affect you? And how did it make you feel? And it was kind of like that we allowed this kind of airing of pain, a little bit, and just hitting the restart button in a lot of ways. And relationally, not just being present began to form such a deeper bond, not only between Sara and I, but I began to form a bond with my children that I honestly didn't even know was possible. And it makes me sad to think that. And it was just the right time. And my kids were still so young. My oldest now is 14. She was 10 at the time when I stepped away. But it was such it was such a crucial point in my children's lives. And I just thought, man, like, I didn't know that my children could feel so connected to my heart, and vice versa. And I just didn't know what I was missing all those years. And, I do understand that, like, sometimes not everybody can, like, quit their job to be home more. And, that didn't come without big sacrifice from me. But that's not the answer for everybody, obviously. But that was my call. Right. But I will say the presence of mind and the presence of heart and the presence of having my priorities aligned with the ones who God has given me to primarily care for, my family. I really did begin to experience a brand new joy that I just didn't know was possible when it came to family. And that's kind of what we've been growing and experiencing, obviously not without struggle. We still struggle. Man, God has grown me up and grown us up as a family in so many ways.
Let me ask you just a practical question, because one of the things that people would want to know, or at least, and you touched on it a little bit, was that one of your biggest fears was that you weren't going to be able to provide financially for your family, which I think is a huge issue for men in general. They want to be the provider. And with you stepping away from this thing that you'd done for 20 years, how did you see God show up for your family in those practical ways, like with finances?
Oh, yeah, it was huge. There were things that I never even would have thought of that God provided. And so when I left, I literally I said, okay, there's one thing I know that I should do, which was I started an event for guys, Lead Me Live events that I did for that first year, and they were great. I traveled around my family, and so it worked out. I mean, I was scared to death, like I wouldn't, have any guys show up to these things, and I wouldn't make any money, and I'd lose money. And God provided. We were able to pay our bills.
That's cool.
And then I just also kind of left margin to say, okay, you know what? I'll plan these few things that I feel like I'm supposed to plan, but otherwise I'm just going to open my hands. And I started just getting calls. I got calls from some churches that wanted me to come share my story. I got a call from Bob Lapine with Family Life asking me to join their speaker team, which, was an awesome honor for me. Weekend to Remember had been a conference that had touched Sara and I's marriage in 2009, and so to be able to join that team was great. Then Kirk Cameron called, and said, hey, do you want to do this marriage and parenting event with me once a month? Hop on the bus. I was like, man, it was like everything, especially with Kirk, what he wanted me to do was really amazing, because he was like, hey, come out on the bus for one weekend out of a month and do a little worship, sing a few of your own songs, and share your story. And I was like, man, that was like everything I love, from speaking to the worship all in one thing,
Right.
And for me to be able, and one of the things I loved about that too was like, it wasn't about me. It was somebody else's event, and I just got to come alongside and serve. And I think that was a big part too that I wanted to play, which was more serving how I could other people. And so it really is crazy. Even to this day, I've learned this pattern of trust, in the sense of leaving space to say yes to what God is calling me to do, and not trying to, out of fear, fill my schedule. And that has honestly, God has provided more than we've needed through that. And I never, up until these past 4 years, ever learned that in my life, or had the chance to do that. We passed that schedule so tight.
Right.
And so when I felt called to that, God just provided. And it's, man, I hesitate to just say to people, like, okay, just step away and open your hands, because then I'm like, okay, yeah, well, what if it doesn't work out that way for everybody, right? But at the same time, I can say that in my experience, stepping out when God calls you into a scary place and opening your hands and saying, what do you have for me? I've heard more stories like mine along the way than I can count. And I do believe that when you prioritize the things that you're meant to prioritize, and you get things straight with God, that He always provides.
Well, and I think what I heard you say earlier in our conversation too, Matt, was that you really felt God turning your heart back towards your family. So you were like, well, I don't know if that I want to give this up, but this is where God is leading me. And so I have to do this, and I have to trust that if He's going to lead me there, then He's going to provide for me. And that's the hard part, but that's where I would say, because you might have someone say, oh yeah, well, I want to do this, and so I'm just going to leave my 40-hour week job. No, is God leading you there? Is He leading you? Does it line up with Scripture? Does it line up with the heart of God? And obviously being there for your family and being there for your wife, those are things that is very clear. That's a part of the heart of God for husbands, is to be there for their wives and their kids. So that's what I hear you saying, is that, it's super hard to take that jump, but you clearly felt the Lord nudging you towards that direction. And that's why you were like, okay, I don't know how this is going to happen, but I got to trust. So, and I hear you. I hear you.
And Sara and I felt like to like, hey, you know what? We have to make other sacrifices. If we live in a smaller house, we have to, whatever we have to do to be together and honor what God's called me to do, then we'll do it, you know, and along the way, you just face those different things. You know, I think another thing too is regardless of whether or not people feel called to leave, you know, whatever, you know, career situation they're in, or, you know, I mean, there's all kinds of things that people are wrapped up in. I mean, from hobbies to material things to, you know, career to other kinds of drive. And there are all different kinds of ways that God calls us to get recentered and refocused in our passions and our desires and our actions into pouring into what matters most. And that's one of the things I talk about in my book, you know, that I think is the heart of that book for dads especially, is like our kids have one father, you know. It's like I mean, not that people can't play fatherly roles, but for those of us who do have children in our home, it's like those are our children that they have one dad to raise them, and in our wives, you know, it's like they have one husband, and nobody else can play that part the way that God has called us to do it. Without us, there really is a void, and that is like so important. There will always be people pursuing, you know, there are always people who want to be the next rock star, the next career star, or, you know, the rich guy or whatever, but like there will never be another you as a dad or a husband. And even as a mom and a wife, right? For all the women listening, that is a important and unique role that God has given and designed you for your family. And I think just getting tuned into that and serving in that way. And to the guys out there, what I always try to tell them is like, no matter where you're at in life, just plan it, like the way you plan for everything else in your life. Like, you know, you have to be at your job at this time. You know what you're selling. You know how many you have to sell to make it. You know the meetings you have to have with coworkers or your boss. It's like, take that intentionality and think, am I planning for the most important things the way that I'm planning for these things? And just getting more intentional about, you know, what do my kids need for them? How am I providing it emotionally and spiritually? Am I carving out time? Am I setting aside, you know, actual time to be with each child and with my wife? And am I setting aside time to speak with my family about important issues and to make sure that my kids, you know, are you know, like safe on their devices, you know, and all this stuff that like, we just let this stuff slip. And I think it's more of a mindset and a heart of like, how am I serving at home with the same passion I'm serving at work.
That's really good. The book is called Lead Me, Finding Courage to Fight for Your Marriage, Children, and Faith. It's by Matt Hammitt. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today on the Momcast and sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. I really appreciate it. Hope the book really encourages people.